This video is about relative pronouns and subordinating conjunctions. These are two different types of words that can go at the beginning of a dependent clause. We'll talk about the standalone test for dependent clauses, placement of subordinating conjunctions, some common subordinating conjunctions, and some special categories of dependent clauses that actually use relative pronouns instead of subordinating conjunctions. We covered a few units ago the difference between a phrase and a clause, and all clauses have both a subject and a verb, like I brushed or father used. However, dependent clauses cannot stand alone. They are not complete sentences all by themselves. They're missing something. If you compare that to down here, these are independent clauses. And this very first word, if we took it out for a couple of these, they become independent clauses. Those words are the subordinating conjunctions. And down here is a different beginning to a dependent clause called a relative pronoun. More on that toward the end. Subordinating conjunctions can show up in two places. At the beginning of a sentence, at the beginning of that dependent clause. Notice there's a comma connecting it to an independent clause. And they can also show up at the beginning of the dependent clause that comes after the independent clause. Here's a big list of some common subordinating conjunctions, words like after, although, as, or as if, as long as, because, before. You probably recognize that some of these words can be prepositions at times, or a variety of other parts of speech, depending on how they are used. We looked at this graphic from Grammar Monster earlier in the year, looking at three different functions of clauses. A clause can function as an adverb, and here we see this word when, which is a subordinating conjunction. And we also see that clauses can function as adjectives or nouns. And here we begin these dependent clauses with the word who that replaces the noun in front of it, or what that begins a whole phrase or a whole clause that stands in place of a noun. We could replace what happened last night with a thing. In the same way that we can put autistic in front of friend instead of who has autism after friend. It turns out these special type of dependent clauses are called relative clauses, or sometimes we call them, and we break them down into noun clauses and adjective clauses. They all begin with relative pronouns. So the words what, which, whoever, whatever, that are all relative pronouns. They begin these dependent clauses much like subordinating conjunctions do. Here, a noun clause is a dependent clause that acts as a noun, and it can be used in any of these roles that nouns are used in. The second special type of dependent clause is an adjective clause. And here we see the relative pronouns who, that, or which replace the noun in front of them. Depending on whether these clauses are essential or non-essential, we may or may not use commas. The gist of it is, if we narrow down the subject, then it is considered essential, like these two, and we don't put commas. And the other three examples, this is just extra information. It does not narrow down the subject. No comma, or we surround them with commas, excuse me. The function of these relative pronouns is to relate extra information. Here's some of the more common ones that begin these noun or adjective clauses that are a type of dependent clause.